Eucharistic miracles, what are they? Why do they matter? What kinds of things do we have to be careful about when talking about them? All that and more straight ahead. I'll be right back. Well, hey there, Gracious Gang. It's Mike from thegraciousguest.org, back with you here in my little home studio, the little home of the Gracious Guest here. And I am really, really excited for today's topic that we're going to take a look at. It's something people have been asking about, and this is at least a first crack at kind of the Eucharistic miracle thing, kind of as at a somewhat of a macro level, and we're going to take a closer look at a couple examples. But before we do that, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel, like this content, share this content. If you're listening to the podcast, please do leave me a good review if you could over there. Rate the show on anything that you're any podcast aggregator you're using, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, many others I can't remember off the top of my head, but basically if you can get podcasts from it, I'm on there. Okay, so if I'm not, let me know and I'll reach out and make sure that the show becomes available on whatever service you're preferring to use. So Pocket Casts also, that's my preferred one. They don't sponsor this or anything, but hey, I like them. I think they're a great app. Anyway, today we're talking about Eucharistic miracles, and with me to do that is Father Joshua Cavender. Father Josh is parochial vicar at St. John the Baptist Church in New Freedom, PA, real close to the Maryland border, right down there on the state line, basically, at the threshold of the Diocese of Harrisburg. He's a priest of the Diocese of Harrisburg. He's been ordained a couple years now. I think he's coming up on 5 years. And his name came up when I was asking around about folks who might be fun to talk to about Eucharistic miracles. He'll tell you why that is here in a little bit. And I think you're really going to enjoy it, so let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I should mention that Father is also the Catholic chaplain at York College. And I thought we'd go ahead and dive right into the topic here. Without further ado, Father Josh Cavender on the topic of Eucharistic miracles. Check it out. All right, Father Josh Cavender, thank you so much for being my gracious guest today on the show here.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, and I think actually what happened was I was talking to Sister Geraldine, who's been a repeat, I almost said customer, that's not the right word. She's been a gracious guest, to use the show title, a couple times in the past, and I don't know what it was. I was just talking about the different topics, and I said to her, anyone come to mind, maybe talk about Eucharistic miracles? And I don't know if this surprises you or not, but you were like the first name she mentioned. So, so the Holy Spirit or whatever the case may be. But
I suppose so. We actually did a retreat together on like the Kerygma and basics of catechesis at the beginning of the semester. So we ended up hitting it up. We had a great time together.
Sure.
at the beginning of the school year. So
awesome. Well, let me just ask you a little bit about just even your own kind of background or your own your sort of vocation story in a nutshell. I guess I know that's always
Sure.
something they ask you to do very quickly, but just in general, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So I actually grew up in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, right between Harrisburg and Lancaster. And I'm the oldest of the 5 Cavender boys, and so I went through Catholic schooling. Ended up I was a Lancaster Catholic grad,
Okay.
and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life after high school. And I had been to many Quo Vadis Days retreats and stuff like that. I was actually at the first one in 2005.
Okay.
So still have the T-shirt, I think. And the I was working fitting into it, but the
That is a way
anyway
of happening.
I know. It must have shrunk in the wash. But anyway, I ended up had the opportunity to go to college, and I went to Juniata in what's pretty much dead center of the state, up by Raystown Lake, and I got my degree in engineering physics. And so I really loved this idea of like math and logic and being applied into the world, and then I was trying to find a job with something to do with that.
Right.
And so there's certainly plenty of jobs for physicists and mathematicians and stuff like that, but I was looking at doing research, and I just it's a wonderful and awesome thing to do research, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. So then I was looking at teaching.
Sure.
And teaching's a wonderful profession, but I just couldn't see myself as like a high school teacher 10 years down the road. So then I was getting like really like, oh, what am I supposed to do here? And I was even looking at doing like the Brother in Exchange or like a Peace Corps, like something. Like there was all these different opportunities I had. Like, let's just go over to like Africa, help some little town over there, and like defer my college loans and do something crazy and good with the world. And in the process of doing that, I took everything to prayer, and the Lord, for lack of a better term, clubbed me over the back of the head with a spiritual 2x4 and just said, like, what about seminary?
Yeah.
And my life, if I could describe it as a 1,000-piece puzzle, fell into place immediately.
Wow.
All of the stress and anxiety of what I was like trying to figure out with life just fell into place.
Wow.
And I realized that everything that I desired was just right there. And so I went to seminary in 2011, was ordained in 2017, and honestly have never been happier.
Wow.
So that's awesome. The Lord knew I was dense, so he had to hit me pretty hard over the back of the head.
I guess he has to do that with all of us to some degree, but what's funny is that's such a great segue, I think, into our conversation for today, because, I mean, I really think that's one of the greatest treasures of our Catholic faith is the sacraments themselves, just across the board of this recognition that God is no mystery to him. He's the one who invented matter in the first place, so he clearly thinks it's important, and there's no divide, obviously, from his perspective in terms of the preciousness, if you want to put it that way, of his material creation and the spiritual creation, and we are this unique meeting place of both. So I think it would be almost like a flaw in the story, so to speak, right? If God only emphasized our spiritual side while this whole time our material aspect isn't really that important. And so that's something that's always resonated with me, the idea of the sacraments just in general and the material aspect of it. And I wanted to kick off to you here this in talking about Eucharistic miracles, but you want to distinguish here maybe for our audience just a little bit about what's the difference between what we might call the miracle of the Eucharist, right, just sacramentally speaking, versus these more specific kind of Eucharistic miracles per se that we're focusing on today.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think people would die of love if they really knew what the Eucharist was. Like the absolute miracle that takes place. And it doesn't matter if it's in like a little, St. Olga's Parish in Nowhereville, Pennsylvania, or, Pope Francis in St. Peter's. The Catholic Church has always and everywhere taught that the Eucharist is Jesus himself sacramentally present. That it's not simply a reenactment. That like, well, first of all, like there's way too many people here. Like we're not sitting down at a table. Like this isn't like a Jewish Passover feast.
Right.
It's not just like where two or three are gathered in my name, I am present there. It's not a spiritual presence, and it's not even a presence, and it's not even a here's bread and wine, and because of these prayers, we're infusing Jesus.
Right.
That it starts as bread and wine, and it ends as Jesus. It starts as a what and ends as a who.
Right.
Would
that last one you mentioned be more of like a consubstantiation, that idea that like Jesus like joins to the elements, but there's not like a total swap in its essence or in that substance itself?
Yeah, so that's the idea, like the consubstantiation that theologians have called it, like in, with, and through the bread is Jesus. But if you ever seen one of those movies before where there's like a lightning strikes a building and like two people like switch bodies?
Yes.
Like so, it looks the same on the surface.
Now that I'm thinking about it, there's a lot of those, I think, aren't there? No,
I know, right? It's like Freaky Friday,
right, yeah.
all those like made-for-movie TV shows and stuff too. But yeah, so the point though is that this person looks the same. They would be genetically the same if you were to like test them.
Yeah.
But there's a different person underneath. There's a different who. Now that's different because it's going from one who to a different who, as opposed to this is bread now with a person who also happens to be God.
So the whats are still there. You could say the accidents, the formal term we use, but like I often say when I'm teaching this to kids, sometimes I'll use the inverse example of where, you have a banana and, you see bananas can look very different. They can have all these different accidents. Some are green, some are yellow, some are big, small. Even if you have one that's mushy and is all gross on the floor, but it still is retaining enough of what makes it a banana that you kind of know what it is. So the accidents are maybe changing or can be changeable, but the substance of the thing it is itself, stays the same. With the Eucharist, it's the opposite of that, right? But basically, the accidents don't change at all, but but what it is, and that other level of who it is now has changed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So it's that the substance itself. The substance was bread. Now the substance is Jesus.
Right.
And so it looks the same on the surface, but on the underneath, if we were to be able to roll back the hood of reality, open that up, and look inside to see what it is, we wouldn't just see like bread. We would see the face of God.
Sure.
And which is amazing.
Well, it's interesting because obviously for anyone who, and we do have, quite a few folks who tune in for one reason or another. It might be quite frankly, a family member or friend or someone who's happy that I'm doing this, whatever. Everybody's welcome. But my point is that it's not necessarily obviously a whole audience here of 100% committed believing Catholics, in this theology.
Sure.
And so what's interesting to me is for this conversation is to say, like, for those who might already have sort of a tough time with that teaching, why don't we, for fun here, just dive into it. So what are we talking about with Eucharistic Miracles? Because I feel like it takes it in this whole other, for some folks,
Sure.
just really shocking kind of whole other level, and they may not even be aware of it.
Well, yes. So, I mean, the Eucharist is a shocking teaching. I mean, after Jesus said in John 6, like, unless that he said, I am the bread of life and you must eat the bread of life. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, you're supposed to give us your flesh to eat? And then, like, Jesus wasn't like, oh, no, like, I'm just being symbolic. He doubles down and says, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life within you. Mm. And then people leave because it's a hard teaching.
Right.
And so it's not like this is a new thing being a hard teaching with the Eucharist.
Sure.
But God also is infinitely compassionate, so he wants us to believe this. Like it was a make it or break it point for Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so he wants to give us signs and realities. The first Eucharistic miracle that happened to help people understand the Eucharist, the very first one was actually the feeding of the 5,000.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you ever thought about that
I have
before,
not.
but
That's
he
a good
gave
point.
us a sign.
Yeah.
He gave us a sign to understand that the whole Bread of Life discourse is explaining the feeding of the 5,000.
Right.
Where he just gave them bread. It was very simple. And so it was, you've come to eat bread so that you might have life, because, we need to eat to have life. So in order to be able to consume supernatural life, I am the new bread from heaven. Mm. So he gave us a physical reality to understand the supernatural reality that he was doing in the Eucharist.
Wow.
So it's not a new thing that we've just started inventing Eucharistic miracles either.
Right.
Jesus started with that one too. So
sure.
So the miracle of the Eucharist started under the pretext of a Eucharistic miracle. So then anyway, sorry. There was a.
Oh yeah, no, and I've even thought too, or well, I've thought that I've heard this and then thought it. I didn't come up with myself by any means, but the Luke chapter 24, with the road to Emmaus, and that I don't think coincidental timing, right? That the moment that he's that story builds up to is this very sort of Eucharistic supper with these disciples on the road, and that precisely the moment that he sort of vanishes from the typical visible way that they're used to him is at that moment of taking in the bread that's been blessed, right? And so that's another one that comes to mind.
And the word that's actually used there is to be veiled from sight.
Right.
Many people would say disappeared, which means like he was there, but he's no longer there.
Right.
But to be veiled by sight means that he's still present, we just can't see him.
That's a good point. Yeah, because otherwise it's not like he leaves, he's with them in this whole new, intangible, but more significant, perhaps, way.
And so it also then says that they recognized him in the breaking of the bread. And so they recognized him in this reality of bread. And it actually uses the same words in all of the feeding narratives: the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000, the road to Emmaus, the Last Supper, and St. Paul in Corinthians talking about the Eucharist. It says that he takes, blesses, breaks, and gives. It's those four words together that are only found together in those contexts surrounding the Eucharist.
I know Mike Aquilina and some others have done a lot of good work, I think, at pointing to and pulling together a bunch of the ancient sources, church fathers, etc., showing how, it's basically the breaking of the bread and the prayers, as practically, I don't want to say unanimous, but let's say, practically unanimous euphemism in those guarded times of the early church, where their lives are threatened. This sort of euphemistic way of referring to the Mass, which of course, the central reason for the Mass is partaking in the Eucharist. And so you do see that all across early church history as well, too.
Oh, absolutely. But and even like why those four words, though, would actually go back to the cross itself, where Jesus himself is taken when he's arrested. His body is broken.
Yes.
He gives the blessing of his own life, and then he is given then that life for the world.
Wow.
So it is actually the four actions of the cross itself in Jesus's very saving mystery. So that's where we get the holy sacrifice of the Mass and the cross are using these four words.
Well, that's so
together.
fascinating too, because again, the importance of the material here, and that this is something that God wants to do, because again, he could do it in theory any way he wants. Like, why does he have to horrifically be tortured and bleed to death, in this just ghastly way, to actually do the thing of shedding all of that blood? He's not some, sadist or something like that,
No,
and I honestly,
of course not.
I can truly respect someone who's genuinely coming at what we believe with words like that, because I can see it from that side. I feel like you can have a more honest discussion with someone who's really there than someone who's just not interested at all, But
absolutely.
But what? So how? I mean, and there's way too many for us to go through like every single one of them. I picked a few maybe, but
Sure.
Did you have so? What do we mean here more specifically with these so-called Eucharistic miracles then, beyond the typical? And that's such a bad word to use too. The typical Eucharist, but
Sure.
but the typical setting,
typical
perhaps.
supernatural events outside of the normal supernatural events that God gives us. So
That's so like him.
So the oldest recorded confirmed Eucharistic miracle that I was, in terms of, I'm sure that it could have happened any time, but was the Lanciano. I apologize if I'm butchering this name. That's in the year 750.
Lanciano, I think, or is that Lanci?
Lanciano?
Yes, yeah, I have it. Yeah.
So that was a miracle where simply like the priest said Mass, and then all of a sudden it was like he looked down, and there was like a piece of human flesh looking like in the paten, and the chalice seemed to be filled with human blood, and he was like, "Well, that's not what happened last time." Right. It was rather surprising, and so they kept this as it was celebrated as a great mystery, but then. As it turns out, then science developed, over the centuries. So, 1,200 years later, we were able to take a look at this,
which the fact that it's still in that condition is interesting in and of itself. But
I know. So and so you can bring in basically forensic anthropologists or somebody who's used to studying and trying to find things out about ancient artifacts, and so. When they, all of a sudden they, just looking at some notes here, but it concluded that the host is human muscular striated tissue of the myocardium, which is the left ventricle of the heart. That there's arteries, veins, branches of nerves, and adipose tissue. They can all be identified.
Wow.
so it wasn't like we were just like, oh no, this is like really, really it. And they're like, yeah, like, whatever, somebody just like switched it out or whatever.
Right.
Or the priest was like exaggerating that maybe he just cut his finger and saw some blood on it, like, and thought it was. But no, like,
or that it's some other tissue from like a different mammal or something like that.
Yeah,
like
he
hoax,
just
yeah.
he brought up some cow's heart or something like that. But like, no, this is actually like, and so the other thing is that they looked at it and that like it's that there was no sign of preservatives in it either. So like even the miracle of it lasting that long is like beyond like the normal natural bounds of what should happen. So I mean that was in the year 750.
Wow.
And I think it's fair also like to realize also that the purpose of a miracle is to inspire our faith and be able to teach it what it is. So it's fair that like when we see this, we're like, okay, like that seems like a strange thing. Like, why would that happen? Like, I can be skeptical about it, but like, how many times in Jesus' own life did he do things right before people's eyes?
Right.
And was then hit with skepticism.
Right.
So like our natural human side here is like, I don't know, I'm a little skeptical of
right.
It. And so
or even just
fair.
Maybe some mix, but also just maybe a hardened heart, because you figure I've always been mystified by the guys see Jesus put Malchus's ear back on, and then they still arrest him and beat him up and take him in, and they're the same ones beating him and mocking him. I just don't like how is that possible? But it is, right? Except for the grace of God, there go I. So like it's not. Like, I hear this all the time with students, like, why wouldn't he just do this? Why wouldn't he just do that? Because then everyone would believe. I'm like, that's not true. Just from your own life experience. Like, we all see things we don't want to believe, or it's a mysterious, lot that we all are.
Sure. Well, the basic fundamental thing is that our entire faith comes down to somebody rose from the dead.
Yeah.
Like, people doubt the resurrection.
Right.
So I think... So part of this though, what I mean by that is that God didn't just do it once. So even within the 21st century, we have 4 reasonably confirmed Eucharistic miracles.
Okay.
So since the turn of the century, we have already had 4 Eucharistic miracles, I believe. So one's in India, one's in Mexico, and there's 2 in Poland.
Wow.
And so. I think the one in Mexico was the oldest of those 4. That happened in 2006.
Okay.
And so in 2006 the priest like distributed a host to a nun, and she looked down and all of a sudden it was like oozing blood out like into her hand.
Jeez.
This red substance. And she was like, Father, like, what do I do with this? My host is bleeding. And so they saved it, and they actually, in accordance with the bishop and, reverence, I always like to say that with the scientific testing so that it wasn't like some, like we weren't irreverent around these Eucharistic miracles. But that when they sent it away to the forensic lab for research, it came back that the reddest substance analyzed corresponds to blood in which there are hemoglobin and DNA of human origin. The blood type was AB, and the one and that's similar to the one found from 750 and to the Shroud of Turin.
And the Sidarium, I think too. Of Oviedo, like I'm just laughing because that's been a recurring theme that's come up on this channel with some other interviews we've done on different topics. It's always AB, it seems.
Yeah.
Just something else.
I know. Hey, well, there you go. If Jesus had AB blood, then he had AB blood. So,
Yeah.
And I believe that was actually the same scientist that tested the case from 750. Also tested the case from Mexico. But then also in Poland, like they had the one in the priest was at mass, said they did the consecration, but then accidentally dropped a host.
Right.
And then like looked down, and there was like it looked like as if it were bleeding. It wasn't like there was reddish spots on it. And so they saved it and put it into a little. That's what they put it into a little ablution cup or a little vessel of water to dissolve it. I mean, that's so going back to accidents and substance. When the accidents disappear, the substance disappears. Right. So when it's no longer recognizable as bread, it's no longer recognizable as it's no longer Jesus.
Sure.
So just as a clarification there,
Sure.
why we do that. So the standard procedure then would be put the host in water, it dissolves, and then we're able to put it into holy ground.
Right.
And all of a sudden they look down and it looks as if it were bleeding. And when they tested it, they took it out, and it saved it. And the report on that one from the local forensic scientist was that the report said from their website during this time the fragment of the host dried out and appeared. It was appearing more like a blood stain or a clot. And several studies were commissioned on the host, and the studies found that the altered fragment of the host is identical to the myocardial, the heart tissue of a person nearing death.
Wow.
And additionally, the structure of the muscle fibers and that of the bread were interwoven in a way that was impossible to produce by human means.
Wow.
So it was like as if like bread just started growing out of a human heart, or all of a sudden bread just started growing a human heart within it. They were like interlaced with each other.
That's so bizarre.
So it's not like you just take human heart muscle and like fold it into the bread and like pancake it out and cook it.
It's infused or kind of Huh.
They were worked together that was just not in a way that was possible. And so all of a sudden you start seeing like these tests come out, and very similar circumstance also with the other miracle in Poland in I think 2013.
Right, I remember they were pretty close in succession relatively.
Yeah, so that was 2008 and 2013.
Okay.
So they were only 5 years apart from each other.
Wow.
And so this was, like looking again at, they took it to the forensic department and like, can you just tell us what this is? So it's not like that just Catholics are deciding to like, oh, it's Jesus, like something crazy happened. Like we're taking it to the best authority that we can know.
Right. I think
to objectively look at
and
that.
Is that true? I think I've heard a lot of times, I don't know if it's every time, but I know a lot of times I believe they will send, depending on whatever the appropriate discretion, and treatment of the elements and stuff is, but that they'll send to sometimes multiple labs, or they'll try to do them as blind tests very often, so that there's not some sort of, bias or something. Like we send it to the, I don't think this exists, but we send it to the, Eucharistic Miracle Confirmation Laboratory in blah blah blah, like where
sure.
you get the result you want ahead of time. It's done very respectfully, very scientifically, very professionally, is my understanding.
Well, so the whole point of this is that Jesus didn't come to just be able to convince a lot of people that he might be God. He came to prove to people that he was God, because he's the one and only person that can save us. So we're not about deceiving here. If it's not Jesus, then we don't want to have a part in it.
Right.
Like we have a personal interest in this. Like, if the Eucharist is not Jesus, I should not fall on my knees and worship it.
Right.
But if it is,
I should.
then I should be treating the Eucharist with the same adoration as if Jesus himself walked before me.
Sure.
And so like, with these Eucharistic miracles pointing to the reality of what's happening in the Eucharist, like that God gives us another sign to be able to say, no, this is my son.
Right.
Like, this is Jesus. Like, and so that we could take, that we can trust truly and honestly, because it's like one of the hardest teachings of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
That we can truly and honestly believe with scientific backing, with reasonable scripture, deep scripture basis, and throughout the entire tradition, that like the Eucharist is Jesus. So we don't want to have any sort of deception in that.
Right, and I think, and that's why, correct me if I'm wrong, but I like I said, I didn't get a chance to write a lot down, but just glancing over some of the cases I was looking at, and I love that, I don't know if you were going to mention this, I apologize if you were, but now Blessed Carlo Acutis' website that he started some years ago, and we'll have some links in the show notes for that, but let's see if I don't speak Italian, but I wish I did, but is it Miracoli Eucharistici, I think, .org, so it's like, Miracoli for like miracles, and then Eucharistic, or Eucharistici.org, and he was a young man who, I believe he died of cancer, and he was only like 13 or 14, and this was just, I don't remember when he died. Wasn't it like, it's not more than 15 years ago, or 10, yeah, so he's, so he is this great patron of youth, and he had started this website to kind of catalog officially confirmed and verified Eucharistic miracles, and so we'll have that linked, as I mentioned, but one of them that I thought was really, well, in looking over that, rather, what I thought was interesting was you got this variety of several that are like what you've described here, where there's some sort of visible, and often then later on we actually test it, and verify that it's human blood or human specific, human heart tissue, and that has all these fascinating characteristics where it's not just some hoax, and it's something that can't just be explained away, but that we also sometimes get, I saw examples on there of, the face of Christ appearing in this very strange way, and it's not just some sort of like not a watermark, but some of them have that imprint on them,
sure.
But
or even that it's not just like the French fry that looks like Abraham Lincoln,
right?
Like this wasn't just a pure happenstance. It wasn't just a watermark. That this is something that started as one thing and ended as another. There's something beyond human capacity happened here.
And it gets a little trickier the further back you go in some cases, where it might just be a report, but that's certainly with these modern phenomenon of documented, multi-person attested to, this is not just some, like you said, like Sister Mary Margaret comes out and she's like, "You'll never guess what happened in Mass last week. I wish you had been there, and I wish we had any kind of proof, but it was amazing." So of course the skeptical kind of world would, I think, rightly at least have some issues with that, because,
Well, if you're asking me to base my eternal salvation and change my entire life based on something, like, I want to be certain about it, like, reasonably certain.
And that's, of course, the importance of the, the place of even something like private revelation, for example, versus, what's public revelation. And so this definitely kind of can be maybe on that line a little bit, but I don't know, was there any, I don't want to put you on the spot with this, but I don't know if there was any that you hadn't mentioned already that was a particularly interesting one, or your favorite. I don't know if your favorite, if that makes sense, but it's the Eucharist. But
well, I mean, part of this was that, honestly, one of my favorite ones here was the one this one in Poland, the one that happened in Poland, where that it's the heart tissue near death.
Mm-hmm.
Because it shows that Christ, like, we like, when Christ bears the weight of our sins, and like he knows that we're like, it speaks to the miracle of the Sacred Heart.
Mm-hmm.
That Christ bears his heart to us, and we keep stabbing it. And I know that when we open our heart to somebody, and then like they tap it in slightly the wrongest, a painful way, we get all sorts of angry. We become defensive. We get like we lock up our hearts so that we could never be hurt again.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Christ himself leaves his heart open to the pain of us rejecting, rebuking, not believing in it, and that it is crowned with thorns and pierced to this very day. And yet it is still bared open to us, because he knows that if he continues to bear his heart to us, that we will eventually come to his heart.
Beautiful.
And And so that's why just that it is the heart muscle that is near death, it is that Christ died out of love for us. He
Amen.
died from love for us. So
Sure. Well, and maybe
but
that's, I mean, just to kind of start bringing it into our home stretch here, I mean, we already kind of mentioned some of this, but just, I mean, any thoughts on just sort of, if people want to, well, in one sense, if people want to learn more, if you have any suggestions, but also, just kind of key takeaways as you see it, like when you, even in your own personal faith, or if you were in your priestly capacity sort of ministering to someone, who was on the fence about the Eucharist in general, or was wondering about this, what might you kind of say or direct them to consider?
Sure. And to go back then to the very first question that we started with, the miracle of the Eucharist versus the Eucharistic miracle. That it's amazing to see something that's out of the ordinary, right? Like that we see something like heart muscle infused in something that looks like bread that we believe is Jesus, but that it seems to, like, these crazy things happen with these Eucharistic miracles. And so fundamentally, what these miracles is that it takes bread and wine and turns them into, say, human blood or human flesh. Well, what's more miraculous that God takes bread and wine and turns it into human flesh, or God takes bread and wine and turns it into himself? Just because we can see one of them doesn't make the second one any less miraculous.
Or more difficult for God to do. Like it's not like it's hard for him to do this.
Yeah. And so just because the Eucharist happens in 100,000 churches around the world every single day, just because in a sense it's become ordinary, doesn't make it any less miraculous. And in fact, it's more miraculous by the degree of the change.
Sure.
And so just because this has become human flesh, well, this just became God.
Right.
And so the true miracle of the Eucharist then is just because is that, like, in comparison between the two, a simple daily mass, the 21 minute quick daily mass at 6:30 in the morning is actually objectively more miraculous than something becoming human flesh.
Wow.
That was bread and wine. And so, like, that when we go to Mass, that we can encounter not just a physical change, but that this sacramental change of the bread and the wine becomes Jesus himself. Like, we would think about, if any celebrity decided to walk through Mass, or decided to walk through town today, I don't know, whatever, like Elon Musk, Patrick Mahomes, whatever, like, we would be rushing across town to get to him. Or her, whoever.
Yeah.
But
this big event, right?
This big event. But the reality of the Eucharist is that Jesus has an address in our town.
Right.
For New Freedom, it's 315 North Constitution Avenue. I could see Jesus today in New Freedom, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And so, we look at even something like the Shroud of Turin, right? Like, how beautiful this is. But at the same time, like, when the priest soaks up some of the precious blood in one of those purificators, isn't that equally
that's a good point. Yeah.
Precious in our eyes?
Yeah.
So all I mean to say by that is that when we're struggling to believe that, like, God gives us these signs to be not to amaze us in some, like, magic show. Like, Jesus didn't just give, like, the feeding of the 5,000 just because people were hungry and he wanted to be on, like, Key and Peele's, like, Trick the Magician show.
Yeah.
The whole point of it is to bring us to something greater.
Sure.
Like, I'm giving you physical bread so that I can show you that I'm going to bring you spiritual bread. He didn't just rise from the dead because he wanted to show that he was more powerful than death. He wanted to show that he was more powerful than death so that we would trust him, that he could bring us to eternal life.
Right.
That he could raise us from the dead. So the whole point of these miracles is to help us believe that the Eucharist is Jesus, and that is actually more miraculous than any of these Eucharistic miracles.
Amen. What a great meditation to sort of press pause on here, at least for now. I'll have to definitely have you back in the future for sure. If I'm sure we could find more and more fun stuff to talk about. But thank you.
Well, it would be absolutely my pleasure. So you have a wonderful show here, and
thank you.
I'll keep you and all of your viewers in my prayers.
Well, thank you so much, Father, for joining us today. God bless you.
God bless you as well.
Pretty awesome stuff. And it's really just the beginning. I think we're really going to have to unpack this a little bit more and go even deeper and get into some more specific examples of Eucharistic miracles. There's so many we could look at. We just picked a few for our time constraints here today. One more one I want to mention that happened, interestingly, I think 1906 in Colombia. And there was this tsunami, and the priest goes out at the request of the people to bring the sort of power of Christ in the Eucharist in this very real way. Is this very gospel-like calming of the storm sort of situation, and that the moment that he came down with the monstrance to the beach, the waves basically subsided and returned. And you may not believe that. You may be skeptical about that. Hey, fair enough. Let's look it up. Look at the resources I've shared below. Maybe leave some comments. Constructive comments there in the comment thread. Love to get back to you about that, and hopefully just sort of start this conversation. And as always, get us thinking about wonder and awe. Get us beyond these materialistic, secularist, reductionist sort of attitudes that prevail so very often in our world. Let's try to widen the horizons here a little bit and be courageous enough to see beyond just what's immediately apparent, and be open, and the vulnerability that comes with that requires, to be courageous, to put ourselves out there, to let ourselves imagine and dream and see what the Lord really wants to maybe have us be considering and open up to us. So, I'm Mike Creevy, thegraciousguest.org is the website. Everything's over there. Go ahead and check it out. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.